So you want to make sure our shed is to code? I love malicious compliance. Our neighbor reported our old, but sturdy, shed to the city for being too large without a permit. Inspector comes out, measures. Nope, the shed is well under the size limits and doesn't need a permit. Husband starts asking questions about the rules and gets all the specifics on what is allowed. The shed is old and very basic. Why not have a bigger, better shed? Oh, and by the way, the inspector knows the neighbor. She used to work in the planning department, knows the rules and clearly was just trying to make trouble. Her M.O. He looks into her property and says he can see a good half-dozen issues if we'd like to report them. We laugh, but nah, we're gonna go the malicious compliance route. We rip down the shed, hoping neighbor is smugly gloating to herself. We do nothing for 3 weeks. Well, except draw up plans, buy material, lay the foundation and line up a couple construction friends to help. Then one Saturday our glorious big new shed goes up. Now we hadn't heard from this neighbor in the 3 weeks, but now she's asking about our new shed. She'd love to see inside if we don't mind. We did. Cue another inspection notice for building a granny flat. The shed, on our property. Obviously the inspection goes fine. Well, except those violations on neighbor's property. That unpermitted open fire pit built right against the retaining wall and fence is a concern. We don't want it burning down our new shed, haha. She's got a couple guys out there right now jackhammering out concrete. I think I'll go offer them some cold drinks from the mini fridge in the new shed. Offering them drinks is a very neighborly thing to do. Now, as soon as she clears up the fire pit problem, move on to the next item on the inspector's list. Do one violation at a time so as to keep her from getting bored. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw rocks. Hilarious. Well played. I had a neighbor who tried to weaponize code enforcement against me. What she didn't realize is that 1. The city doesn't care if I put my trash cans out 10 to 15 minutes before the officially allowed time, and 2. The head of code enforcement was her neighbor on the other side, whom she'd also been tormenting, and who told his staff what the score was and to ignore complaints against me. The day she listed her house for sale, he texted me a picture of the for sale sign and we kept each other updated on the progress of the selling process. We're buds now. I repay him for his kindness vis-a-vis his staff by following code scrupulously. I love that you waited 3 weeks before building the new shed. Just enough time for her to feel smug. Reminds me of when I had a fence built between my house and my neighbors, who had lived there for decades and would walk in up down my property to get to their backyard. They had trees and bushes on their property so they couldn't stay on their side. I spoke with them, and was willing to pay for the whole thing, as I didn't want money to become an issue with the old lady. She fought tooth and nail, knowing that they would no longer have access to walk on my property. When trying to figure out the property line, she kept saying how the vast majority of the land was hers and I couldn't build where I wanted to. So I had someone from the city come to draw us up the official line. And it went about 3 feet further into their property line than I had originally expected. We actually had to trim up a lot of the bushes to make room. Not believing us, she hired the city, again, to do the same inspection. Again. And even with all her arguing, the property line didn't shift. Nice. Kinda had the same thing happen to me. Build a shed. Neighbor filed a complaint about encroaching on her fence. Inspector pulled the plate, or whatever you call the document about proper lines. Turns out the fence she installed is 2 feet on my property. She had to have it moved. The gall to ask to see inside. SMH some people. Imagine you said yes and she reported you for another violation, lol. Friends of mine were bystanders in a code enforcement fight, being the only people in the neighborhood both parties spoke to. The neighbor across the street put up a pole barn on a slab with a loft, power and water. Now you'd think that'd require permits. And you'd be right. Except the neighborhood Snoop couldn't find any. So she bitches to the city. Who come out and nothing. The inspector doesn't even go look. There's just a short conversation at the front door. So she calls again. And a different inspector shows. This time he happens to meet the neighbor in the driveway and never leaves the car. Mr. Polebarn was nothing but cool over the whole thing. Let her call code enforcement. She's just wasting her time. Snoopy calls twice more, gets no response at all, and then takes it to the city council, where one of the councilors promises to get to the bottom of it. And he does, showing up at Mr. Polebarn's place. They have a pleasant conversation, where Mr. Polebarn explains the trick for a third time. See, his pole barn is 15 feet into parcel 242A and thus outside of the city limits. His permits were granted by the county and they did the inspections. Case closed, but Snoopy steamed over it for years. I think I'll go offer them some cold drinks from the mini fridge in the new shed. Malicious. That was incredibly satisfying to read. Hope that teaches her to mind her own business. The patience with this is what makes it so good. Well played. For some reason this made me wonder how much the local planning regulations can be abused. Would it be okay to put in another shed? 2 more sheds? 20 totally separate sheds? Can I put in paths between the sheds? Covered walkways? Partially walled walkways? If that's too much, how about if they aren't in any way connected to the sheds? A gazebo is just an open-air shed, right? Now I probably can't just put a shed on stilts 10 feet in the air. But maybe I could raise it a few inches above the ground. Staying within allowed dimensions, of course? And if the terrain is uneven, one shed could be higher than another, right? So how much can I alter the terrain without a permit? I can bring in dirt, gravel, and rocks for landscaping purposes, right? How high a hill can I build? What if I do it a little at a time? A few inches one year, a few the next. What about erosion? What if my rocks and gravel happen to shelter some areas and not others and I end up with a hillside? So, if I somehow happen to have a hill on my property, I can put a shed right next to it or even on it. Right? Even embedded a little into the hill maybe? What about a lot? Can I have a shed partially or even mostly underground? What if it is a steep hillside? Could I have one shed physically above another? It's okay to have electricity and electrical appliances inside the sheds, right? Furniture and furnishings? Insulation, heating, and cooling too, right? If I stay within the allowed dimensions. Could I even add balconies, ladders, stairways, a whole second floor? It would have low ceilings. But for short people it would be fine. Basically, how big of a Hobbit Airbnb hotel can I operate in a residential area without needing zoning permission? Open mouth smile. Love it. Enjoy that shed. But is everything up to the Swanson Code? My neighbor told me that years ago they were having work done, so of course inspections were done. The inspector happens to look next door and sees an above-ground pool which wasn't compliant. Lo and behold, no permit was gotten for that pool. The neighbor was made to take down the entire pool. I live in a town where code enforcement is no joke. Neighbors use it against each other. Neighbor called them on me. Lady comes out and realizes what is happening and goes over to his house and checks out his place. Top to bottom. Takes photos. She didn't find anything, but he spent a couple hours sweating it out. She came back and told me that he got a nice lecture about false claims and how if he does it again, she'll bring the whole team to inspect everything. I know he's done unpermitted work, and he does it again, I'll be happy to point her in the right direction. For reference, if code enforcement comes out and later finds something that you didn't get a permit for, the fine starts from the day they were first there. If they have photos, and they always take a ton of photos, the fine is $500 a day per work that needed a permit. If she got photos and he gets the second visit from code, his fines will already be in the tens of thousands. As someone who works for local government, I love this. The city I used to live in had a website where you could enter an address and see how many times code compliance had gone out there. The neighborhood did not have an WA, and one resident liked to call code compliance on anything he didn't like. I had the most calls on my street by far, but only ever received a single notice. This was perfectly done, nice job op.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.